Today's class, most of it is going to be totally optional, similar to the Wednesday classes we've been having for the past bit. Basically, all I want to do is just talk business stuff. 1.5, thanks. So all I want to do today is just talk about some businessy points. Then once the businessy points are done, I want to thank you all for what's been a really interesting semester for me, in which I hope you all have learned half as much as I've learned. And then I just want to talk about two optional topics we can discuss and then send everyone on their way. And since these are optional, it could just be me sitting here alone in a room. Anyway, so first off, business stuff. Today, last day of the semester, today is the day your papers are officially due. A lot of you have asked me for extensions, and a lot of you have gotten extensions. As I said before, it's COVID. Due dates are stupid during COVID. So if for any reason you need an extension, I'm going to almost certainly give it to you. It's just a matter of when you give me your paper. If you give it to me any later than today, I'm not going to be, unless I have talked to you separately and there was an extenuating circumstance, I'm not going to be able to give you in-depth feedback on your final copy. So if you wanted in-depth feedback, I need to get it. You need to get it to me today. Otherwise, just reach out. And it is not too late to ask for an extension. If you need an extension, if something's come up, if it's literally just, you're going crazy from COVID year and you just need another day to make the paper something you're actually happy with, go ahead, you can take it. All right, final grades. So the way this works, I always forget this date. I'm pretty sure it's the 28th. But Baruch College, grades due spring 2021. So grades are due on May 28th. What that means is that is the day that I need to put your official grade into the grade book. After that, I cannot put anything more in there without lots of paperwork and lots of issues. So what this means for you all is that I'm going to need a few days to grade anything you give me, or you're going to need to stay in close contact with me. So I've been giving extensions that are not going right up to this deadline, but if something comes up and you're like, Professor, I'm going to need right until the last moment to get my paper into you, email me, we'll be in touch, we'll work something out. I don't want you to end up having to stay up for 48 straight hours because you think I'm not going to let you work until the 28th. Like, I'd rather you get some sleep. But if that's what's going to happen, I'm going to need you to be in touch with me so I know that you haven't just gone AWOL, because I only am going to be able to cut you a benefit of the doubt if I know what's going on and you've reached out to me. So as long as your papers are coming in before that, I've talked with all of you who got extensions about extensions. Anyone who still needs one, talk to me. We'll set up a date. Basically, though, it'll give me enough time to grade these without comments. Now, because I'm not putting comments on the papers, that means that if you're not getting a comment, I'm not going to bother sending you back the document. Instead, it would literally just be your own paper being sent back to you. So if you want to know what you got on the paper, or you want to know what you got in the final class, final grade ahead of the final date, just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to send you your grade. I'd be happy to break down how you did in each part and how the math works, so you know before it finally gets posted to CUNY First what your grade is going to be. I'm happy to talk to you ahead of time. I'm going to be very busy with grading, so I can't guarantee I'll get back to it immediately, but I should within 12, 24 hours if you have any grade questions. Missed work. Basically, at this point, I need anything you missed. If you didn't write your first paper, it's pretty late, but let me know and we might be able to work something out. But basically, I'm going to be lenient on any days, any grading, anything like that. If you get an extension, you won't be able to get comments, but no points will be taken off. And this is the last day for grades. So make sure, this is my deadlines are not a big deal. I don't care about them. The school deadlines, as soon as CUNY First gets involved and CUNY First puts up a little wall, that's a real deadline. So make sure that, like, if you reach out to me on the 27th, there's, in theory, it's going to be a royal pain in the ass to me and I won't be happy, but at least there's something I can do. If you reach out to me on the 29th, it is too late because it is no longer in my hands. So make sure that you stay in touch ahead of time. And if you want to make sure that things run smoothly, reach out to me in the next week or so. This is, I think, next Friday. Get me, if you don't have an extension, get me your paper by the end of today or the end of tonight. It says officially 11:59 p.m. But honestly, I'm not going to be grading your papers at 3 in the morning. So if you get them to me, even by like 5 a.m., I'm not going to take off any points. I prefer that if it's 2 in the morning and you can't see straight, I'd rather you just be like, Professor, I've been working on this for 6 hours. Can I get an extension so I can go to sleep for a few hours? If that's the situation, I'd rather you reach out to me. But that's the deal with that. Lastly, I know a lot of you have done so already, but it would be very helpful to me and to Baruch to evaluate my teaching. That's the word I'm looking for, teaching. Basically anything you think I can improve upon, things that you think work, things that you think didn't, just some fun little bubbles. It takes about 10 minutes. Nope, it will be very helpful, but if you're allowed to say anything as nice or mean as you want. Unless you sign it, I won't know who it's coming from. And also this gets posted after the grades get posted. So even if you write in a way that will make it easy to identify, like say you have a specific typo you always do, and in that typo thing you write, "You're the worst professor ever. I hope you get hit by a bus tomorrow." Like that won't affect your grade because I won't have had the ability to do so. Although it would hurt my feelings. So I prefer you don't say I get hit by a bus. All right, any other business questions at this point? If there's no other business questions, then that knocks off boom, 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 boom. All right, well, in that case, 1.5 is just thanks. So that's the end of our official semester. You are all free to go. Have a great summer. We'll finish all your work and then have a great summer. I just wanted to say this has been a really great class for me. I hope it wasn't as miserable for you all as Zoom classes can be. I've been on both this side of the screen and that side. I know that it can be really excruciating at times. Also, this has not been an easy year for anybody. And I know some of you have gone through some real shit. So all of you who are still here at the end of your second semester of Zoom teaching, like, give yourselves a big fucking pat on the back because it has not been easy. And this is not how teaching is designed to be. And this is not how learning is designed to be. So simply getting through here, like, you should all be really proud of yourselves and just hopefully you have some time to relax this summer because you've all really earned it. You've been an amazing class. Participation has been all I could ask for not actually being able to see your faces. So thank you all for a great semester. If you want to go right now, you are free to go. No judgment, no anything. I'm sure you have tons of stuff you all need to work on. Thank you all for swinging by. And if you have any questions about anything, feel free to email me. That's the end of the part 1 mandatory part of class. If anybody wants to stick around now, yeah, thank you all. And again, no judgments one way or the other if you want to get going now. I'll give everyone a minute to clear out. Thank you all so much. All right. All right. Let me erase these things and we can move over to the second optional part of class. The first thing we're going to be talking about is something that has very little to do with philosophy of psychology, but I think is an interesting topic that I don't know nearly as much about as I want to, and some of you showed some interest in. So basically what I'm going to do is Stoicism was brought up a couple classes ago, and what I'm going to do now is give what has got to be one of the most surface level basic descriptions of what Stoicism is, how to go about reading more up on it, and just generally why it's a philosophy that can be helpful for people who especially in a crazy sort of world where we have a lot going on and we're having anxiety and other things. So, Stoicism. How many people have heard of Stoicism or read Stoicism before? All right, Alan said he's been studying and following it for a year now, so you can definitely help me with this part. Yeah. So part of the reason this is going to be a very bare bones thing is that I've never taught about Stoicism. Not only that, I've never taken a class on Stoicism. I've read some Stoicism on my own and just interacting with people, you pick some up, but I'm by no means an expert on this area at all. So again, this is going to be very cursory. But then there are some other reasons that Stoicism is like, it's very hard in a short amount of time to describe what Stoicism is. One of the issues is just that it's really old and there are tons of people who have worked on it over the years. So unlike some things like, some of the views we've talked about this semester, like eliminative materialism, that phrasing didn't come about until the Churchlands more or less invented it in the 60s. Stoicism was invented in around like the year 300 BC. So we're talking a few millennia in which people were coming up with it. It was basically a movement within philosophy that started in the Hellenistic age, which was the time after Alexander the Great. So basically, Alexander the Great conquered a whole bunch of North Africa in through the Middle East to northern India, and then there was this giant empire that kind of fell apart, and then all these new philosophers came in to try to figure out what the hell to do in this new world. Another issue with it is just our sources aren't great because the earliest Stoics were most of their writings don't survive. So it'd be like trying to understand the Bible where like 2/3 of it is missing. It's or like this is different from Plato, because people loved Plato a lot, and I don't mean the stuff you eat, I mean the philosopher. Or was I the only one who ate Plato as a child? So Stoicism is this theory that is very old, and there's a lot of it, and we don't have all the sources. And the other reason it's tough to talk about Stoicism is the nature of Stoicism itself. So when we talk about something like materialism or functionalism or any of these views in modern philosophy, they're generally defined as a set of beliefs. So to be an eliminative materialist is you believe that our common sense statements about the world are false, and we will have neuroscience. So it's just a matter of believing. Stoicism is meant more as like a way of life. It is meant as a view that combines these sort of philosophical views with a way to go about living your life. And it incorporates, it's a very practical philosophy. The idea is it's got a lot of metaphysical views and things like this, but all of them are directed towards the question, how do I live my life successfully? And how do I achieve happiness? And what is happiness? So that's really this idea of Stoicism. So there's this element of Stoicism of you don't study Stoicism, you rather do Stoicism through studying it. So through the act of engaging with the thoughts that people have had, and through the acts of approaching things in a Stoic way, you are doing Stoicism, and the goal is to become a sage or to become someone who has understood things well enough that you are able to live a more happy or fulfilling life. So in that sense, it's kind of got some parallels with certain types of like Eastern Buddhism and things like this, where there's this idea of when you do Stoicism right, it's not that you understand, it's rather that through understanding, you kind of transcend the pain and suffering of the ordinary, everyday life. Alan, have I done an okay job so far of the description?
Yeah, so far.
Okay, good. That's what we got so far. So all that caveats out of the way. So that's why it's so hard to talk about the damn thing. So then, what does it actually do? Or what is it to live in a Stoic manner? So, Alan, do you want to give it a shot so I don't screw it up? Otherwise, I can try to not screw it up.
Well, the very basis of it is basically living your way in a very logical and reasonable way. accepting that there's stuff out there that's out of your control and therefore should not bother you. Or I won't say won't shouldn't bother you, but there's ways of looking at stuff that you're like, okay, that was out of my control. Yeah, it sucks. But I'm gonna keep my calm. I'm gonna approach this in a very logical way, and then through that, it seems like it doesn't bother you as much. But you know, it's more about creating an inner sanctum within yourself where you can retreat to whenever there's difficult situations in life.
Yeah, so that's really the core idea. And just to back this up in terms of like the bit of research I've done over the past few days, the idea behind Stoic philosophy is that things like pain and suffering are not things that are out there in the world. They're not things that, things out there are what they are. The pain and the suffering that comes about comes from you not having a proper understanding of the way of getting through difficult situations. So if you could somehow find a way of understanding what a good and virtuous person would do in this circumstance, what you will do is the pain and things like that of your everyday experience will recede as you understand more about how to go about living in a thoughtful, logical, rational way. And of course, it's the sort of thing of why Stoicism is more of a way of doing things than it is a set of views, is these are things that take practice. Like, it is not immediately natural, or at the very least, we are not programmed from the start to just, something bad happens out there and we instead go, yes, shit happens. What I need to do is make the best of this shitty situation and understand that despite these things, it is still possible to find inner peace. Like, that is not our natural way of doing it. So a lot of what Stoic philosophy is doing the approaching of these difficult situations in the correct sort of mindset, or after you do it, look back at how you could have done it differently. So one of the most discussed Stoic philosophical texts is by the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and I don't know if I'm spelling it correctly, but he's considered one of the greatest Roman emperors of all time. And essentially, it's generally translated to his meditations, but I think that the original Latin is like to myself. And it's basically just the diary of a Roman emperor who is trying every day to live in a stoic way and reminding himself of the teachings and trying to live up to it. And recognizing times in which he fails to do so, grappling with that, dealing with what is being asked of him, because this is a man who had the weight of, the known world on his shoulders. He was a man who was probably in his day one of the most powerful people in the world with more concerns, millions of lives. And he was trying every day, how do I prevent this from causing me stress? How can I find happiness and satisfaction? How can I make sure that when something bad happens, it doesn't overpower me and I rather approach it in a thoughtful way, can learn from it? And so there are these other strange Alan, do you have anything you want to add, or anyone else who's done Stoic philosophy? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Alex, there's no prize at the end of a well-lived Stoic life. There's no title. All it offers you is a way of living life virtuously, so you can make the most sense of this seemingly painful and nonsensical life. And the idea is there's this idea of the sage who will somehow transcend it, but there also, from what I've read, especially with Mark, there's this sense of nobody will ever quite reach that standard. So yeah, it's not like you're going to go to heaven. It's rather that this is just a way of getting through a life that sometimes is problematic. And the reason why, even 2,000 centuries later, it can be very fulfilling to read these things is, one, just to recognize, like, there's something, like, when I read analytic philosophy paper, when I'm reading Fodor, when I'm reading one of these things, there's a sense in which it's not a communal sort of experience where I feel like I'm there connecting with the author. I'm rather trying to understand their their points. When you read something like Aurelius, it really feels like he is taking you on a personal journey in insight, and there's this sense of feeling a connectedness with somebody, and just this is where it's like the practical thing. It's like you are going through this journey with this man, and in so doing, going through a journey of your own life and understanding. Um, and so it's just this, it's a way of trying to, and there's this idea within Stoic philosophy and some of the more extreme versions, that any pain and suffering that happens is somehow you failing to have a proper understanding of virtue and the world. And so there's this, there's a sense of empowerment with Stoicism, where whenever anything goes wrong, it is not the world out there beyond your control. It's rather that you have the power of happiness inside of you. And even in the shittiest of circumstances, there's a matter of you can be better about how you approach those pains. And what it's interesting to do to read these sorts of things is not just see that this is like an abstract thing, but to see people who have tried and succeeded and failed to approach life in this way through terrible times and through heartbreak and through death and through incredible stress. So that's really like the core idea of what Stoic philosophy is. It's a way of living to make the best of what is sometimes a terribly shitty world. And it's also like a set of principles where even if you don't ultimately accept everything about Stoic philosophy, there is a sense in which every time that something goes wrong, and every time that you've done something that causes you pain, there was probably something you could have done in that circumstance that would have been a better way to deal with it. And Stoic philosophy tends to encourage you to be mindful in those moments and not just, not just consume, not just go for, but you can take a step back. An example of Stoic thought from Alan. Marcus Aurelius said that when you see people acting wildly or violently, all you can do is remind yourself that they are that way because they don't know any better. That's it. You don't get mad. So in that moment, if somebody's screaming at you, in this moment, there's a tendency almost to scream back. But the person who's practiced Stoicism and understands is able to recognize that no, in this moment, that is not, like, they just don't understand what's happening. Once you gain this understanding, you no longer almost pulled in the direction of yelling back. You don't escalate the situation. And really, the only way you can learn not to do this is just through practicing it and trying in that moment to understand, be aware, and really, afterwards think about what you could have done differently or how it went or etc. And so there's really this strange thing where in one sense it's like this ancient sort of philosophical view, but in a lot of ways this notion of Stoicism has a lot in common with things like mindfulness practices and like just taking a deep breath. And I always find it interesting that these different like theories from different times and different places all very often seem to converge on similar approaches to dealing with pain or understanding and these sorts of things. Did that make sense for about as good of a description of how Stoicism is done? Devendra.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, while you were describing the Stoicism example with regard to like the reacting to a violent person, it kind of seemed like this weird intermediary between having free will and not having free will, because you recognize that you have the free will within yourself to sort of have perspective and be accountable for your own life circumstances. But then by that same token, you looking at the other person as ignorant and sort of like not knowing any better, that lack of information is sort of determining whatever they treat people as and such.
I think that's a really good point, and I think one of the real powers of Stoicism is, in a certain way, it gives you a feeling of free will. It almost does run this sort of, it gives you this free will feeling where the world around you is going to do stuff, and what you have control over is how you respond to it and what's inside you. And there's this ownership where what you own isn't so much the things that happen. And in a certain sense, it's okay that you can't control those things, because what really matters at the end of the day is how you live in spite of those things. And so, yeah, there's this sense, as Govindra said, about this idea that the things that happen might be determined, but there is this place for free will in the sense of how you respond to it and your feelings about it. Any other thoughts on this? The idea behind it is the only thing you control are your thoughts, so you should pay mind to who controls them, you or the situations, people in life you encounter. And I think that's a really beautiful way of thinking about it. And honestly, some of the quotes from Stoic philosophy are just like really beautiful. Like even just like going to like the top, you just type in like Stoic philosophy quotes. They're those sorts of things that they're the sorts of things that I would not like, I'm sure there are people with tattoos of these things because they are that sort of powerful thing. And this basically, yeah, this notion of if you can't control the situation around you, you can either be a slave to that situation, or you can control all that's left for you to control, namely yourself and your feelings. And once you understand that, you will be able to find, that sort of in a level of inner peace that you would not have otherwise. If anyone wants to Google some good Stoic thoughts, Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius are the big ones. Also, I have a few readings. So I'm going to email everyone in the next couple days generally. And so I will include some PDFs I have of Stoic philosophers. One of them, I think, is just like a general, what is Stoic philosophy, applying Stoic philosophy in the modern world sort of thing. And it's a very practical philosophy in a time in which you feel powerless and like the world around you is beyond your control, which I feel like in the modern day and age, we more often feel. So how can you get by and survive in that? Well, here's a way of approaching it.
Right. I think that we can read, like probably it's a little bit compatibilistic approach for this, but I think that Daniel Dennett and AJ Iyer were written about Stoicism, like in some kind of way.
Yeah, I think that's right. And yeah, there is something very compatibilist about Stoicism. What compatibilism is, for those who don't remember, or for those of you who, if I forgot to discuss it, but the basic idea behind compatibilism is this idea of the world is deterministic. Like that is a fact of the matter. When you have no ability to change what is going to happen. You cannot do that. There is no conscious soul. However, there's something left that is worth calling free will that we do care about. And that thing is enough that we can have things like morality. And so what this sort of Stoic view kind of is a version of that, of saying that, look, you cannot control the world around you, so don't bother trying. What you can do is control how you respond to it and how you yourself, like little behaviors within that. And really what it is to live the good life is to understand that fact and to understand in a practical way how to behave and what to feel in these different circumstances. And the other thing I do love about Stoic philosophy is this idea that like, there's not a prize at the end. It is rather just that like, you do it because it is itself worthwhile. And through doing it, you understand that level of worthwhileness. And the other thing is like when failure comes about and you don't live up to the Stoic ideal, that's part of the journey. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns, anything about Stoicism? And again, I will send out some more readings that I have. And then once that's out there, if anybody else has something that they think people would want to know, I'm happy to send that out as well. All right, so transitioning to a different, but in some odd ways related problem is this notion of personal identity. And this is one of the classic like big questions that comes up in philosophy. And it's one that has the potential to really mess with your mind, but also is one of those things that I think you can learn some interesting stuff about the human self by asking this question. And I think this is also an area in which our psychology research has had things to say. So first off, does anyone know what the problem of personal identity is, or what personal identity is? And I don't mean this in the sense of like, how do I identify? It is a more ground level than that. So this is identity in the sense of identical. So in the sense of 1 equals 2 minus 1. This is an identity statement where they're equal to each other. So the idea here is, what is it that makes different people the same person? Or more accurately, what makes it the case that two things that we tend to say are two people, or two time slices of the same person, or the same person at two different times? What makes it the case that that person is identical to themselves? So for instance, all of us commonly say, like, if I pull up a picture of myself as a baby, I don't have one handy, but we can imagine it would probably look something like this. I have fat little feet and fat little legs and fat little hands because I was a baby and I was about that big. So, however, when I say this, when I show you this picture, I don't say this is the being that my mother gave birth to, or this is the being that Victoria Neely gave birth to on blah 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 date. I rather say this is a picture of me as a baby. And the question then is, what makes it the case that this me and this me count as the same person? And so there's a certain sort of philosophical question in the background here, but this also has a lot of like practical implications. So for instance, if I were to come over to your house and steal your laptop and run away with it, and you clearly saw me, what would you do?
Take it back.
You take it back, or what else might you do? Who'd you call?
Report to police.
Yeah, you'd call the cops. And what would you say? You'd say, well, that person took my laptop. Well, what is it to be my laptop? It's to be the thing owned by me, or I. Well then, here's a question. How can you have a notion of property, or a notion of anything along these lines, or a notion of morality, if you don't begin with a sense of what is it to be a particular person, or to be the same person? If I stole your laptop and the next day said, oh, that wasn't me, that was this other thing, David Neely yesterday, that's a totally different person, our whole society would fall apart. We assume that things are the same throughout time. And the reason why the philosophical question of personal identity comes up is that it's very easy with many things, like, well, it's very easy with mathematical things to say what makes two things on the opposite side of the equation equal to each other. Well, what is it for 1 to equal 2 minus 1? Well, you could just, if there's a single thing over here, and then you had 2 over here, but you take 1 away, like, that's straightforward. It's easy to describe. When you turn to personal identity, you very quickly realize it's very tough to say what makes it the case that you are the same person as you were as a baby. So why is this? Why is it so difficult? Well, it's what it starts to look like is the obvious things that we'd say make us the same person. The closer you look at them, problems come up. So let's go with what the common sense ideas are. Why are you the same baby, same person you were as a baby? What is the common sense sort of explanations we give?
Probably the continuity of our memory.
So we've got DNA, memory. Any others people want to throw up here? So let's start with the DNA one, or the body one. Does anyone know why there's an issue with saying to be the person you are is your DNA? A way of saying this is there's both a sense in which this captures too much, as in it doesn't differentiate between two things that we think are different people, and also doesn't quite capture what we mean. So DNA, where is it? It's inside our cells. How does it get there? How does DNA get inside your individual cell? Well, you were born to a mommy and a daddy, and then they created one cell, and then that cell split and made another cell, which split, etc., until you became a big person. Now, as a matter of fact, this is basically just copying. So there's two things. Issue one is one, DNA mutates over time. And this is exactly one of the issues. No two cells, because you are copying, were like, any copying process is not perfect. And the copying process of DNA from one cell into the next is such that over time, your cells in your body are going to have slightly different DNA from one another. So this can cause a problem. Another issue, though, is that there are identical twins where they, in a certain sense, start from the exact same DNA, and they will mutate over time, but as they mutate from each other, the initial starting point was the same. So if you want to say that DNA is like, your DNA starting point is your identity, and as long as that continues, it's the same person. Well, here's the problem. It doesn't continue in the exact same way. And if you've got an identical twin, they start with the exact same DNA you have. Fingerprints. An issue, I don't actually know what the situation is with fingerprints and identical twins. I can never remember if they have the exact same fingerprints. But I think an issue which Cassidy brings up is there's a sense in which, like, your identity isn't getting boiled down to these biological things. Because to take an extreme example, if we say that what it is to be the same person is to be a person with the same fingerprints, then if you get in trouble with the mafia and they chop off your fingers, you're no longer the same person. And yet nobody wants to say that losing your fingers means you're not the same person. So it can't just be the fingerprints. There has to be something else. But the issue is when we look at the DNA, constantly changing. If we are looking at your individual cells, just about every cell you've ever had in your body, there's some question about whether your brain cells stay the same, but just about every cell you have is being replaced gradually over time by new cells. Old ones where they're like little factories, they run out of power and have to be replaced by new ones that run more effectively. So when you start trying to define a person in terms of their physical body, you start to run into problems because it seems like the physical body is completely changing over time. Which leads us to the other direction that people often want to do, which is continuity of memory. The idea that you are who you are based on what you can remember, or that there's this I that all the memories train back to. But what are some issues with saying who you are is defined in terms of your memories and your continuity of memories?
You don't remember what happened when you were like 1 year old?
Yeah, so first off, one of the issues is we don't get to explain our baby picture. We don't get to say, because babies don't remember things. So one issue you can say is that the baby is, you can't explain why this is the case. Why is this baby? Secondly, another issue is you can straight up forget memories. So if you forget a certain event in your life, does that mean it didn't actually happen to you? So if you, and you can imagine this, like one issue here would be that, one way of making it the case that you didn't do a thing, if it's defined in terms of conscious memory, well, the definition would then be that if you got yourself blackout drunk, the person doing it wasn't the same person because there's no memory continuity, which, seems kind of weird. Another thing is that memory itself is very unreliable. And there's all this new evidence. There are certain memories that are just like formed in our brains, but there's all this evidence that oftentimes when we remember something, it's not like we have a perfect snapshot. It's rather that we are, in some sense, reconstruct different parts of our thought. So when you have a memory, what you're doing is not just, playing the tape, but rather based on how things are stored in your head, reconstructing what happened in that time. And because of this, it can be very unreliable. It is not uncommon to have false memories where your father tells you a story so often when you were a kid that you genuinely feel that you have memories of it, when in truth, your father can't tell you and your twin brother apart and is talking about the other one the whole time. So even if you didn't do it, that is now somehow in your memory. So, or yeah, when people remember child abuse that never happened in therapy. So this is a big issue where there was this big push where I mean, it's still the case. Child abuse, any sort of sexual abuse is majorly underreported. And so there was this very well-intentioned movement to try to get children who had grown up to and the idea was these children had been sexually abused and they had now, they had repressed those memories to get through life. And so there was this goal of trying to get them to come to terms with the abuse they had faced in therapy, either through hypnosis or through something else. And the issue was, one thing that kept happening is these children, it would turn out the very process of going through this hypnotic therapy would put the memories in that weren't really there. So even though it was very well intentioned and sometimes would allow people to come to terms with these childhood traumas, other times it led children to remember traumas that had never actually happened. Cassidy says, I've heard that hypnotic therapy is unreliable if it's said to occur before 4 years old. And I think I don't know the literature, this might very well be right, but I'd be willing to bet that there's probably it's also potentially unreliable at later times just because of how suggestible we can be as people and all sorts of other things. So yeah, memory seems to get messy. Also, there's this issue of given those things we talked about in the previous couple classes about the importance of unconscious drives in who we are and what makes it the case that you're the one doing it or that something will occur. Well, it seems like a lot of these things are unconscious and a lot of the processing we do is unconscious. And this conscious memory approach doesn't seem to properly capture what is happening in that case. If I if I stab you, we want to say I did it, even if the processing underneath it was unconscious processing. And my hatred of you was caused by unconscious memories or things that I don't quite, I'm not really consciously fixating on in that moment. So that's another way in which it's hard to say what is the person? So there's this major issue of every answer people have tried to give as to what makes you the same person or what. Another way of putting it is, what does I refer to? When I say I am blah, 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 what does that mean? What is the word I picking out? It seems so obvious that there's an I, but it's just really hard to give an answer as to what makes it the I. What if I say I can only be one person because my mom gave birth to me? Where would the different person come from if they were not born in the human way? So another issue that might come up, and another thing that causes problems for personal identity is, what if I say I can be one person? I can only be one person because my mom gave birth to me. So one issue that we run into here with the trying to define yourself in terms of your mother is we now have a problem defining who's your mom or what makes her the same person. So sometimes it's just going to push the problem back there. But another issue is that, so the idea would just be that what exists, there are not people. There are rather just time slices. And when we're talking about the self, it's just a time slice bit. Now, there's also another issue, you can run into all sorts of fun problems with personal identity as soon as you introduce sci-fi questions. So for instance, another problem with the memory one is, imagine that your body is decaying and now we now upload your entire memory bank onto a computer and then replug those memories into a different body. Well, now we're really starting to have questions of how would you even describe? I tried in a question about this, just even trying to describe whether or not the person whose memories have been uploaded into this body counts as you or a copy of you. Well, what does it even mean to be a copy of you in this sense? It seems like as soon as you get sci-fi in here, everything really starts breaking down. Which, is a bit of a problem because if there's one thing, the famous Descartes line, I think, therefore I am, uses it 2 times. And this is supposed to be the one thing you cannot doubt. the one thing you understand better than anything else. You're so aware of the self. But once you start asking, what is the self or where does it come from, things start to get really, really messy. And the real answer of personal identity, I mean, I've never found an account of personal identity that I find totally unproblematic. And yet here I go every day still talking in terms of I and thinking I exist. So that's what the problem of personal identity is. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns, other views they want to share, any weird sci-fi movies they want to talk about, anything?
Probably like I'm gonna use the example like I'm not uploading my memories into a computer, but let's imagine that my clone, like it's 100% identical, like to me in terms of DNA and memory, but still I'm not gonna be happy if he's gonna like dating with my girlfriend, paying my taxes, and driving my car. So like
yeah, and I think clones are another case that's really difficult. How do you differentiate? So imagine like at the moment you have two identical clones. So like up to this point, you're here. And then you make an exact replica of this down to every single thing is the same. Now, they're both going to go out into the world and do different things. But at the moment at which they are identical, who do you say is the original person? It's unclear how to do this. Yeah, there's a Schwarzenegger movie about this. There's so many good movies about this. I mean, even something like the Star Trek teleporter, like the beam me up Scotty device, causes all sorts of problems for personal identity. And they always have episodes of this in Star Trek, because what generally the way they explain the way this machine works is it's not that it literally picks up all your atoms and moves them to another place. It rather perfectly copies you. Then as it's copying you, deletes you in this place and rebuilds you in another place. So is that whenever like Captain Kirk teleports, it's not the same atoms, and yet it says that Captain Kirk is still Captain Kirk, which inevitably in any sort of teleportation movie leads to the episode in which the machine doesn't work right, doesn't delete the original, and now there are two individuals running around with all the same memories, both of whom are equally convinced they're the one. So you can imagine, here's person one, they step on the machine makes a perfect copy here, but instead of, this is not a perfect copy, it looks nothing like the person over there, but you get the idea. But instead of deleting this one where it's just like, all right, now there's only one, this one stays alive. And now all of a sudden we've got two people running around with all the exact same memories on different planets. And what happens when they meet and yada, yada, yada. So those are why personal identity is, I mean, it's a fun way to hurt your brain, but it's another one of these classic sorts of views that like, try as you might, you're still going to keep thinking about I. And what about thinking of personality as a cluster concept? That's a really good idea. So do people understand what is meant by cluster concept? This is a notion from Hume, where the idea is that there isn't something, the I, that is the same, but rather it's just a collection or cluster of different properties. I'm describing this correct. Right, Lino? This idea that like, so what the self is instead of like the core, it's just a matter of like, you know, this property plus this property, a cluster of different things together. So, you know, you would be a combination of all these different things. The issue with cluster concepts is, yeah, it's a set of criteria that aren't unnecessary. So honestly, what that would do is you'd be defining yourself in terms of like basically a prototype theory of the prototype theory of concepts, where it's a set of criteria, not all of which are necessary, but that together seem to capture the thing itself. The worry with cluster concepts is whether it really stands up to our intuition that you are the same person in enough of a degree across time that our everyday practices apply. So things like law, because over time, any sort of cluster is going to change. So the idea would be like, as long as it's like a time worm where like you may have been a certain cluster of features here, you know, certain DNA, certain memories, certain height, etc. And then at this time, it's a little bit different. The worry is that if what you do over here, if you commit a murder here, and then all this stuff changes, does it really make sense? If the cluster concept is each individual part can change, do we really want to say that this person here, who no longer has any of the same properties, is the same person as the one who committed the murder? Maybe we want to say they're not. But if so, then we need like a major re-understanding of the judicial system and things like this. So while I think that you're right that a cluster theory of what you are is just a collection of the things that are true of you at a given time, and those can change over time, and what gives it continuity is the connectedness between those things. There's a lot of views that don't play nicely with this sort of time worm view. How would free will play into this? Well, one question that comes up first off here is the whole question of free will generally assumes that there's an I that could or could not be free. So a worry that comes up is if there's no personal identity, it's not even clear what the question of free will would even be a question about. Because if there's no me, if I'm just an illusion, and really there's just a body, and then there's some illusionary mental or brain things going on that give me the illusion of a self that is in no way the same self as the self that was yesterday, then what even is it for there to be this thing free will? Well, if there's no thing, how does the question whether there is this thing has control over its own decisions even come up? It would almost be like a breakdown of, you take the I out of it, and then determinism is just determinism, and every individual cause has an effect, and we're just an illusion in amongst the millions of atoms and meat and quarks and all the other things. And this is why people generally we don't want to think too hard about free will. Well, the nice thing about free will is not free will, personal identity is it's really almost impossible to live your life without accepting that there is an I. It's just almost what would it be to have a hunger? Well, it's that I need to go eat. So in your practical everyday life, personal identity isn't going to change your life all that much. But there is this big background question of maybe it is all an illusion, and I'm just confused about what it is to be the sort of human being I am. By which I mean maybe human being is just a sack of meat, and I am not an existent. Any questions about any of this stuff at all? Or anything else we've talked about this semester? Or any questions about, well, anything? That's really all I wanted to cover today. So feel free to ask me just about anything right now, about, whatever, or we can just call the extra session done as well, and I can tell you all to go on your way and have a great paper writing time for those of you who aren't done, or a great finals time for those of you who are. All right. Thank you all for sticking around. Thanks to those of you who have met with me this semester and also come to those Wednesday sessions. It's been a really a joy for me, and I hope it's been pretty good for you all as well. And feel free to please stay in touch if you want to. I will definitely be sending emails. If you want to reach out about anything, I'm happy to reach out back. If you're reading about Stoic philosophy this summer and want to just ask a question to someone who very well is probably also going to go and read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations this summer, feel free to reach out and ask any questions or comments. And I'm not an expert on that, so if you have something you want to share with me, feel free. All right, thank you all so much. It's been great. Have a great rest of your finals. And again, if anything comes up, just reach out and we'll make it work. Have a great one, everyone.